September 19, 1944, 11:03 a.m., somewhere in the rain-soaked fields near Arracourt, France. Staff Sergeant Frank Thompson hunched inside the cramped turret of his M4 Sherman tank, watching Sergeant William Crawford peer through the gunner's sighted terrain that probably concealed the Germans who would kill them. Thompson was 24 years old. He'd been in combat for 4 months, survived 12 major tank engagements, and in every single one of those battles the same pattern had emerged. German tanks spotted them first. The mathematics of survival in tank warfare were brutally simple. See the enemy first, shoot first, live, get spotted first, die. There was no middle ground, no partial victories. You either went home, or you burned alive inside 30 tons of steel that became your coffin. Intelligence reported 47 German Panther tanks advancing through this sector. 47 of the most lethal tanks Germany had ever built. Panthers that could destroy a Sherman from 2,000 yards away, while remaining effectively invulnerable to Sherman, return fire at that range. The German 75mm Koka 42 L70 gun could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor from incredible distances. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun needed to get much closer to have any chance of penetrating a Panther's sloped frontal armor. But the gun wasn't Thompson's primary concern right now. His concern was visibility, or more precisely, the complete lack of it. Thompson had been loading the 75mm gun for Sergeant William Crawford since June, since the beaches of Normandy, since the breakout, since the long, bloody push across France. Their survival together depended entirely on one critical factor: seeing German tanks before German gunners saw them. But the Sherman's gunner sight was narrow, just 30 degrees of view. Crawford could only see what was directly in front of him through that limited gun sight. By the time the tank commander standing in the cupola above them spotted a threat and called it out, and Crawford traversed the turret to engage, German gunners were already aiming, already preparing to fire, already about to kill them. The 4th Armored Division had lost 23 Sherman tanks in 3 weeks of combat, 23 crews, over 100 men. Some had survived with horrible burns. Most hadn't survived at all. The first loader Thompson had watched die was Corporal David Kozlowski. September 7th. Chicago kid, steel mill worker before the war. They'd trained together at Fort Knox in those long, hot Kentucky summers that felt like a lifetime ago. Kozlowski's Sherman had taken a Panther round at 2,300 yards. The German gunner had spotted them from a tree line. A perfect ambush position with concealment and clear fields of fire. The German had aimed carefully, taken his time, fired with precision. The 75mm armor-piercing round had penetrated the Sherman's turret like it was made of cardboard instead of steel. The propellant charges Kozlowski had been loading ignited instantly. The temperature inside that turret reached over 3,000 degrees in less than 2 seconds. Kozlowski died instantly, which was the only mercy. His body stayed in the burning tank for 3 hours before recovery crews could safely approach. Thompson had helped carry what remained out. You never forgot something like that. The second loader was Corporal James Martinez, September 16th, Thompson's best friend. They'd survived Normandy together, survived the hedgerows, survived everything the Germans had thrown at them. They'd made plans for after the war, opening a garage together back in California, working on cars instead of tanks, building something instead of destroying. Martinez's Sherman had engaged 3 Panthers near a town called Baccarat. They'd destroyed 1 Panther, damaged another, but a second Panther had flanked them during the engagement, fired from 900 yards. The armor-piercing round went through the turret side, the Sherman's weakest armor. Martinez had been pulling a shell from the ready rack when the German round hit. It struck him directly, killed him instantly. The Sherman burned for 40 minutes before the ammunition finally cooked off in a massive explosion that scattered debris across 100 yards. Martinez's tank commander had come to Thompson 2 days later. The officer was crying. He said if they'd spotted that flanking Panther just 3 seconds earlier, Martinez would still be alive. Just 3 seconds. The difference between life and death, between going home or burning, was 3 seconds of additional visibility. By mid-September, Thompson had watched 11 loaders die, 11 men who did the exact same job he did. 11 men who stood in the exact same position inside their tanks. 11 men who died because their gunners couldn't see threats fast enough. German tanks had better optics, better gun sights, better periscopes, better rangefinders. German gunners could spot American Shermans before American gunners spotted them. American tank crews were brave, skilled, determined. But courage meant nothing if you couldn't see what was trying to kill you. Thompson had started studying how these engagements developed. The pattern never varied. German tanks spotted the Sherman first. German gunner took time to aim carefully. German gunner fired with precision. German round hit first. Sometimes the Sherman crew survived with injuries. Sometimes they evacuated successfully. Most times they didn't. Most times the Sherman burned, and everyone inside died. The problem wasn't the Sherman's gun. The 75mm could kill Panthers if you hit them in the right spots. The side armor, the rear, the turret ring. The problem was seeing the target before the target saw you. Crawford was an excellent gunner, calm under pressure, accurate, fast. But he could only see 30 degrees through his gun sight. Not enough. Nowhere near enough when Panthers were flanking from multiple directions, when German tanks were using terrain for concealment, when ambushes were set up perfectly. Thompson needed to give Crawford more eyes. He needed Crawford to see threats instantly, not after the tank commander called them out. Right now, every second of delay was the difference between loading another shell or dying like Martinez died. The solution came to Thompson on September 18th, the night before this engagement. It was simple, almost stupidly simple. A mirror, a small rectangular mirror from his standard issue shaving kit. 3 inches by 4 inches. Basic military equipment that every soldier received. Mounted inside the turret where Crawford could see it. Crawford could glance at the mirror and see behind them without traversing the turret. See flanking threats. See what was coming from directions the main gun sight couldn't cover. It was completely illegal. Modifying military equipment without proper authorization was a court-martial offense. Destruction of government property. Unauthorized alteration of combat vehicles. Disobeying regulations. The minimum punishment was reduction in rank and pay. The maximum was military prison. But Martinez was dead. Kozlowski was dead. 11 loaders were dead. Thompson didn't want to be number 12. He'd install the mirror tonight, test it tomorrow. Either Crawford would see threats faster and they'd survive, or Thompson would die trying. If this story is pulling you in, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about these forgotten heroes. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because what Thompson does next changed tank warfare forever. These stories matter. The men who lived them deserve to be remembered. You're part of making that happen. Thompson worked alone that night. The maintenance area was quiet after 2,200 hours. Most crews had collapsed into their bunks, exhausted from the day's operations. The only sounds were distant generators humming and insects batting against the overhead lights that cast harsh shadows across the motor pool. The air smelled like engine oil, diesel fuel, and rain-soaked earth. September nights in Lorraine were getting cold. Thompson could see his breath in the glow of the work lights. He pulled his tool bag from under his bunk. Inside was the mirror from his shaving kit, 3 inches by 4 inches, metal frame, government issue, nothing special. Also in the bag, wire cutters, pliers, steel wire he'd salvaged from destroyed German equipment, and a flashlight with a battery that was dying but had enough life for tonight's work. The Sherman sat in the maintenance line, 50 yards away. Thompson walked over slowly, boots crunching on gravel. Nobody challenged him. Night maintenance was common. Thompson climbing into his own assigned tank wouldn't raise any questions or suspicions. He opened the loader's hatch, climbed inside carefully. The turret was cramped even without the other crew members present. His flashlight beam jumped across metal surfaces, illuminating the familiar interior. Ammunition racks lined both sides. The breech of the 75mm gun dominated the center space. The gunner's seat where Crawford would sit tomorrow was to his right. The small cramped space where Thompson would stand during combat, loading shells one after another until they won or died. Thompson needed to mount the mirror where Crawford could see it without moving his head from the gun sight. The position had to be absolutely perfect. Too high and Crawford couldn't see the reflection while aiming. Too low and it would block Crawford's movement during turret traverse. Too far left and the angle would be wrong. Too far right and it would interfere with Thompson's loading position. Thompson held the mirror in different positions, testing angles, checking sight lines. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold, though it was cold. They shook from knowing this modification could get him court-martialed, from knowing he was about to break regulations, from knowing that if an officer discovered what he was doing, his military career would end in disgrace. But Martinez's burned body flashed through his mind. Kozlowski's funeral. 11 other loaders who died because visibility was measured in 30-degree increments instead of 360 degrees. Thompson settled on a position 12 inches to the left of Crawford's seat, mounted at a 45-degree angle. The mirror would reflect what was behind and to the sides of the tank. Anything approaching from the rear or flanks would appear in that reflection. Crawford could glance at it without taking his eye off the main gun sight for more than half a second. 3-second check. Just enough to see if a Panther was flanking them. Just enough to survive. Thompson cut 4 6-inch pieces of steel wire, bent each into a U-shape to serve as mounting brackets. He pulled out his hand drill, the manual kind requiring physical effort to operate. The bit squealed against the turret's armor plate as he drilled the first hole. The sound was horribly loud in the quiet night. Thompson stopped every few seconds, listened intently, made absolutely sure nobody was coming to investigate. Nobody came. Installing the brackets took 40 minutes of painstaking work. His fingers kept slipping on the wire. The flashlight kept rolling away across the turret floor. Twice he dropped the pliers and they clattered against metal with sounds that echoed through the tank. Each noise made his heart pound harder. If an officer found him now, caught him modifying the tank without authorization, he'd face immediate charges. Destruction of government property at minimum. Disobeying direct regulations. Unauthorized modification of combat equipment. The penalties ranged from reduction in rank to actual prison time. But Martinez was dead. Kozlowski was dead. 11 loaders were dead. Tomorrow Thompson would either be loading shells or burning in this turret. The mirror might give them 3 seconds. 3 seconds to see a Panther before it fired. 3 seconds to shoot first instead of dying first. 3 seconds to live instead of becoming the 12th loader to die. He secured the mirror to the brackets using twisted wire, made it tight, tested the angle carefully. The mirror showed the view behind the tank perfectly. Thompson positioned himself in Crawford's gunner seat, looked through the main gun sight at imaginary targets ahead, then glanced left at the mirror. He could see both simultaneously without moving his head more than a few inches. Main sight for targets ahead. Mirror for threats approaching from behind or the flanks. It worked. The geometry was perfect. Thompson cleaned up meticulously, wiped away metal shavings, collected the wire scraps. The modification looked crude and obviously improvised. Definitely not factory equipment. But the turret was already crowded with gear. Ammunition racks, radio equipment, fire extinguishers, personal items. One small mirror mounted on bent wire might go unnoticed during routine inspection. Might. He climbed out at U-130 hours, walked back to his bunk slowly, didn't sleep, lay in the dark thinking about tomorrow. The 4th Armored Division was moving out at 0700. Intelligence reported German Panthers in the area, elements of the 5th Panzer Army trying desperately to stop Patton's advance toward Germany. Tomorrow would bring tank battles. Either the mirror would work, or it wouldn't. Either Crawford would see threats 3 seconds faster, or Thompson would die like his friends had died. There was no middle ground in tank combat. You shot first or you burned. Physics and geometry didn't care about courage. At 06:15, Thompson heard engines starting across the motor pool. The battalion was preparing to move out. At 07:12, Thompson's Sherman rolled out of the maintenance area. The engine rumbled with familiar power. Tracks clanked against hard ground with rhythmic mechanical precision. Thompson sat in the loader's position with 76 rounds of 75-meter ammunition racked around him. Armor piercing for killing tanks. High explosive for infantry and fortifications. White phosphorus for marking targets and creating smoke. He'd loaded these shells hundreds of times in training and combat. Today might be the last time he ever loaded anything. Crawford was in the gunner's seat to Thompson's right. The tank commander, Lieutenant Morrison, stood in the cupola above them with his head and shoulders exposed for maximum visibility. The driver and assistant driver sat forward in the hull, controlling the Sherman's movement. 5 men and 30 tons of steel rolling toward German positions 12 miles east. 5 men whose survival depended entirely on seeing the enemy before the enemy saw them. The battalion moved in column formation. 18 Shermans spread across 2 miles of French farmland. Fields stretched on both sides, tree lines in the distance, rolling hills to the north. Perfect ambush country. The kind of terrain where Panthers hid in tree lines and waited patiently. Where German gunners picked off American tanks one by one, with careful aimed fire from concealed positions. Where American tank crews died without ever seeing what killed them. Thompson watched Crawford carefully. Crawford hadn't said anything about the mirror. Either he hadn't noticed it yet in the pre-dawn darkness, or he was ignoring it, or he was waiting to see what it did before commenting. The mirror was mounted 12 inches to Crawford's left, angled at 45 degrees, reflecting the view behind and to the sides of the tank. Thompson had tested it last night. It worked in static conditions. Combat would be the real test. At 0843, the radio crackled with urgent traffic. Lead tank reporting movement ahead. German armor, Panthers, maybe 6 of them. Range 2,000 yards, too far for accurate shooting with the 75mm gun. The battalion commander ordered the column to spread out, find hull-down positions. Places where the Sherman's hull would be protected by terrain, while the turret remained exposed for shooting. Wait for the Germans to close the distance to ranges where the 75mm gun had a chance of penetrating Panther armor. Thompson's crew found a position behind a low ridge. The tank commander called out targets through the intercom system. Crawford traversed the turret, searching with his gun sight. The 30-degree field of view showed open farmland, no targets visible yet. The Germans were smart, experienced, using terrain and concealment, staying hidden until they had good firing solutions, making American gunners search, making them nervous, making them waste precious seconds scanning instead of shooting. Thompson loaded an armor-piercing round, slammed the breech closed with practiced motion, tapped Crawford's shoulder, the signal that the gun was loaded and ready. His heart was pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. This was it. The moment that would prove whether the mirror worked or whether Thompson had wasted his time drilling holes in government property for nothing. Whether he'd saved his crew or just committed a court-martial offense for no reason. At 0907, Crawford fired without warning. The gun recoiled violently. The breech opened automatically. The hot brass casing ejected with a metallic clang. Acrid smoke filled the turret instantly, the smell of cordite and hot metal that every tanker knew intimately. Thompson grabbed another armor-piercing round from the rack, loaded it, slammed the breech. The whole process took 6 seconds. Crawford was already traversing right, searching for the next target through his limited gun sight. Then Thompson heard Crawford's voice over the intercom. Calm, steady, professional despite the chaos. Panther left rear 800 yards. Thompson's stomach dropped like he'd been punched. Left rear meant flanking. Meant a German tank had maneuvered around them during the engagement. Was coming at their side armor, the weakest part of any Sherman. The frontal armor was 51mm thick and sloped. The side armor was just 38mm and vertical. A Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate 38mm side armor from 800 yards without any difficulty. A Panther round through the side would penetrate the crew compartment, would hit ammunition, would kill everyone inside within seconds. But Crawford had seen it, without the tank commander calling it out, without traversing the entire turret to search behind them. Crawford had glanced at the mirror, seen the Panther in the reflection, called it out immediately. The mirror worked exactly as Thompson had hoped. Crawford traversed left rapidly. The turret whined as the hydraulic system rotated them. Thompson watched through his vision port, saw the Panther clearly now. It was moving across open ground about 800 yards away, partially exposed. The German crew probably thought they were undetected, Probably thought they had time to get into optimal firing position. Probably thought the Sherman hadn't seen them yet because American gunners never saw flanking threats this early. They were catastrophically wrong. Crawford fired. The round hit the Panther's left track. Didn't penetrate the thick side armor, but it stopped the German tank immediately. Immobilized it. The Panther tried to traverse its turret to return fire, tried to bring its superior gun to bear. But Crawford was already loading another round faster than Thompson had ever seen him work. 7 seconds from first shot to second shot. Incredibly fast for a Sherman crew. Thompson loaded. Crawford fired again almost immediately. The second armor-piercing round hit the Panther's turret side at the perfect angle, penetrated the armor, detonated inside. The German tank shuddered violently. Thick black smoke poured from the hatches. The crew bailed out desperately, running away from their burning tank. The Panther was dead, knocked out, burning, no longer a threat. Thompson had just watched Crawford kill a Panther that should have killed them first. The German tank had executed a perfect flanking maneuver, had gotten within 800 yards completely undetected by the tank commander, should have fired first from the flank, should have penetrated their weak side armor, should have killed Thompson and Crawford and everyone in the crew. Standard procedure, standard outcome. But Crawford had spotted it 3 seconds earlier because of the mirror. 3 seconds, that's all it took. 3 seconds to spot the threat. Traverse the turret, fire first, win, survive. The tank commander's voice came over the intercom, excited and confused. "Crawford, how the hell did you see that Panther so fast? I didn't even call it out yet." Crawford's response was characteristically brief. "Saw something in my peripheral vision. Glanced left. Target was there." The tank commander didn't question it further. Too busy directing them toward the next engagement. Too busy trying to keep them alive in a battle that was rapidly becoming chaotic. The engagement lasted 40 brutal minutes. Thompson's crew destroyed 2 more Panthers. Confirmed kills with burning wrecks left behind. Other Shermans in the battalion got 3 additional kills. German forces finally withdrew, abandoning 7 burning Panthers in the fields. American losses were remarkably light. 2 Shermans damaged but recoverable. None completely destroyed. Nobody killed. That outcome was almost unheard of in tank combat between Shermans and Panthers. After the battle, Thompson's crew returned to the maintenance area. Crawford climbed out of the turret first, then found Thompson immediately. Looked at him for a long, silent moment, then looked at the mirror mounted inside the turret. Crawford reached out, touched the mirror carefully, tested the angle, saw how it reflected the view behind the tank. He understood instantly what it was and why it was there. Crawford asked just one question. "When did you install this?" Thompson told him the truth. "Last night. Worked alone. Took 40 minutes. Completely illegal. Could get court-martialed if anyone important found out. But Martinez was dead. Kozlowski was dead. 11 loaders were dead, and Thompson didn't want Crawford dying the same way because he couldn't see threats coming from the flanks." Crawford was quiet for several seconds. Then he said something Thompson would remember for the rest of his life. Words that made the court-martial risk worth it. "This saved us today. That Panther would have killed us if I hadn't seen it in time. I need you to do something for me." Thompson asked what. "Install one in every tank in the battalion." Thompson started with Crawford's wingman, Sergeant Robert Hayes. Hayes was a tough veteran who'd lost his loader 3 weeks earlier. The kid had burned alive when a Panther hit them from the flank at point-blank range. Hayes had survived with serious burns on both hands, but had stayed in combat. His new loader was a replacement soldier, nervous kid from Ohio, maybe 18 years old, terrified of every battle. Thompson found Hayes that evening, told him about the mirror modification, showed him how it worked in Crawford's tank. Hayes looked at it carefully, tested the angle from the gunner's position, immediately understood the tactical advantage. Asked if Thompson could install one in his Sherman. Thompson said yes, but it had to be tonight. Had to be quiet. Couldn't tell anyone official. Hayes agreed immediately. They worked after 2,300 hours when the motor pool was essentially deserted. Thompson brought his tools. Hayes kept watch for officers or MPs making rounds. The installation took 35 minutes, faster than the first time because Thompson knew the exact position now, knew the precise angle, knew how to drill the holes without the bit squealing too loudly against the armor plate. When they finished, Hayes tested it thoroughly from the gunner's position, said it was perfect. Said his gunner would be able to see flanking threats instantly instead of searching blindly. Hayes asked Thompson how much he wanted for the work, payment for the modification and the risk. Thompson said he didn't want anything. Just don't get killed. That's payment enough. Stay alive. Go home after the war. That's all the payment Thompson needed. The next day, Hayes's crew engaged 4 Panthers near a town called Moncourt. Hayes's gunner spotted 2 of them using the mirror, saw them trying to flank from the rear, called them out immediately before they could achieve firing positions, destroyed both with accurate first-round hits. Hayes came back that evening raving enthusiastically about the modification, told every tank commander in the company. By evening, 6 more crews were desperately requesting mirrors. Thompson installed 3 more mirrors that night, working until nearly 0200. 2 more the night after. Word spread through the battalion faster than Thompson had ever expected. Loaders talked to other loaders. Gunners talked to other gunners. Tank commanders started asking their crews if they'd heard about the mirror modification that was supposedly saving lives. Some crews were skeptical. The modification sounded too simple, too crude. Most wanted it immediately once they understood what it did. By September 25th, Thompson had installed mirrors in 14 Sherman tanks. He was physically exhausted, working maintenance duties during the day, installing mirrors at night, getting maybe 4 hours of sleep between shifts. His hands were permanently covered in small cuts from sharp metal edges. His back ached from hunching inside cramped turrets. But crews were surviving. The battalion's kill ratio had shifted dramatically. 5 Panthers destroyed for every Sherman lost. That ratio had been completely reversed just a month ago. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded the battalion. Abrams was a tanker's tanker. Aggressive, tactically brilliant, understood armored combat inside and out. He was the kind of officer who led from the front, who fought alongside his men instead of directing them from safe headquarters. Abrams noticed something had changed in his battalion. His crews were spotting German tanks faster, reacting quicker, winning engagements they statistically should have lost. But he couldn't figure out what had changed tactically. On September 27th, Abrams conducted a standard inspection of the tank line. Routine procedure. Checking maintenance, verifying ammunition loads, ensuring equipment was combat-ready according to regulations. He climbed into Thompson's Sherman, looked around the turret methodically. His eyes stopped on the mirror mounted to the left of the gunner's seat. Abrams asked what that was. Thompson's stomach dropped. This was it. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, military prison, everything he'd feared since installing the first mirror. His career was over. Crawford spoke up before Thompson could answer. Said it was a modification they'd made unauthorized, helped the gunner see threats from the flanks, had saved their lives twice in the past week, multiple confirmed kills because they'd spotted Panthers early. Abrams asked who had authorized the modification. Crawford said nobody. They'd done it themselves. Knew it was against regulations. Knew it could mean court-martial. But it worked. It kept them alive. Abrams stared at the mirror for a long time without speaking. Then he climbed out of the turret, walked down the line slowly, climbed into Hayes's tank methodically, saw another mirror in exactly the same position at exactly the same angle, climbed into a third tank, found another mirror. Abrams realized immediately what was happening. Multiple tanks had been modified identically, all without authorization, all using the same improvised technique. He called Thompson over directly, asked him point blank, "Did you install these mirrors?" Thompson stood at attention, prepared for arrest. "Yes, sir, all of them. 14 tanks total. Took approximately 40 minutes per tank. Used salvaged materials. No requisitions, no paperwork. Completely illegal, sir." Thompson stood rigidly at attention, waited for Abrams to order his arrest and confinement. Abrams asked how many tanks in the battalion didn't have mirrors yet. Thompson said, 23, sir." Abrams looked at him carefully for several long seconds, then said something Thompson never expected to hear. "You have 48 hours to install mirrors in every tank in this battalion. That's a direct order. I'll handle the paperwork and authorization. You focus on keeping my crews alive." Thompson stood there completely stunned. Abrams had just officially authorized the modification, made it legal retroactively, protected Thompson from court-martial. More importantly, Abrams understood immediately what the mirrors meant tactically, understood they were saving lives, and he was willing to bend or break regulations to save more lives. That night, Thompson worked faster than he'd ever worked. He recruited other mechanics from the motor pool, showed them exactly how to install the mirrors, taught them the precise position, the correct angle, the drilling technique that minimized noise. By September 29th, every single Sherman in the battalion had a mirror mounted in the gunner's position. The modification was no longer a secret. It was standard equipment. The Battle of Arracourt started on September 19th and lasted 2 brutal weeks. 4th Armored Division faced elements of the 5th Panzer Army, 47 German Panthers and Panzer IV tanks against American Shermans. The Germans had better tanks, better guns, better armor on paper, but they lost. American tankers destroyed over 60 German tanks while losing only 18 Shermans. The kill ratio stunned German commanders who'd been fighting Shermans for months, who knew exactly how to kill them, who knew their weaknesses intimately. But something had changed. American tanks were spotting German flanking maneuvers faster, reacting quicker, shooting first. German after-action reports mentioned unusual American tactics. Shermans were engaging targets they shouldn't have been able to see, reversing before German tanks could get into optimal firing positions. It was like American gunners had developed eyes in the back of their heads. They had simple 3x4-inch mirrors. By early October, word about the modification had spread beyond 4th Armored Division. Tank crews talked to other tank crews during resupply operations. Mechanics shared techniques during maintenance coordination. A crew chief from 6th Armored Division saw the mirrors during a coordination visit to 4th Armored's maintenance area, asked Thompson directly how to install them. Thompson showed him the technique. 2 days later, 6th Armored started installing mirrors in their Sherman systematically. Then 10th Armored Division heard about it. Then 3rd Armored Division. The modification spread from battalion to battalion, from division to division, across the entire European theater. No official orders, no engineering directives from headquarters. Just mechanics installing mirrors because they worked, because crews were surviving, because loaders weren't burning alive anymore. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams wrote a detailed report to 3rd Army headquarters, describing the mirror modification comprehensively. He included precise combat statistics. Before mirrors, 4th Armored was losing approximately 2 Shermans for every German tank destroyed. After mirrors, they were destroying 3 German tanks for every Sherman lost. The difference was undeniable and dramatic. The mirrors gave American gunners a critical tactical advantage that offset German superiority in armor protection and gun performance. General George Patton read the report personally. Patton commanded 3rd Army. He understood armored combat intimately, understood that tank battles were decided by whoever shot first with accuracy. The mirror modification gave American crews precious seconds. In tank combat, seconds determined who lived and who died. Patton ordered the modification installed in every Sherman tank in 3rd Army. Not as a suggestion, as a direct order with full command authority. Maintenance crews across the entire Army began installing mirrors using whatever materials they could find: salvaged metal, wire, even glass from broken windows. The mirrors didn't need to be fancy or professionally manufactured. They just needed to reflect accurately. By October 15th, over 300 Shermans in Europe had mirrors installed. The modification had spread from one desperate loader, his attempt to save his crew, to an Army-wide tactical advantage. And it had happened in less than 1 month, all because Thompson couldn't stand watching his friends die anymore. German intelligence tried desperately to determine what had changed about American tank tactics. They examined destroyed American tanks carefully, found the mirrors mounted inside turrets, initially didn't understand their tactical significance at all. German analysts thought they were personal items, shaving mirrors that crews had mounted for convenience. It took several weeks before German intelligence realized the mirrors were positioned specifically for the gunner to observe threats behind the tank. By then, it was too late to develop effective countermeasures. The modification had already spread throughout American armored units. German tactics that relied heavily on flanking maneuvers were failing consistently. Panthers that used to kill Shermans from the side were being spotted and destroyed before they could fire. The tactical advantage Germans had enjoyed for months was disappearing rapidly. German tankers started avoiding direct engagements with American Shermans unless they had overwhelming numerical superiority, at least 3-to-1 odds or better. The Panther was still objectively the better tank on paper, still had better armor, still had a more powerful gun. But the Americans could see them coming, and in tank combat, seeing the enemy first often mattered more than having superior equipment. Thompson had installed the first mirror to save Crawford's life. Now that mirror had saved hundreds of American tank crews. Men who would have died in flanking attacks were surviving, going home to their families. The modification cost essentially nothing, required no new equipment, no factory production, no complex engineering, just a small mirror and 40 minutes of careful work. But the Army wanted to make it official and standardized. In November 1944, an engineering team from the Ordnance Department arrived at 4th Armored Division headquarters. 3 officers and 2 civilian engineers. They'd been sent officially to evaluate the mirror modification, determine if it should be integrated into standard Sherman production, make it official Army equipment instead of improvised field modification. The team spent 3 intensive days inspecting tanks, interviewing crews extensively, testing the mirrors in combat simulations. They measured angles precisely, calculated sight lines mathematically, verified that the modification didn't interfere with turret operations or crew safety. Their conclusion was unanimous and unambiguous. The mirrors worked effectively. They should have been part of the original Sherman design from the factory. The Ordnance Department recommended that all new Shermans rolling off production lines be fitted with mirrors in the gunner's position as standard equipment. Existing tanks already in theater should be retrofitted during regular maintenance cycles. The modification would become official equipment, standard issue, no longer improvised or illegal. But there was a significant problem that emerged. The engineers wanted to redesign the installation, make it cleaner and more professional, use manufactured brackets instead of bent wire, use regulation mirrors instead of salvaged shaving mirrors. They wanted to take Thompson's improvised solution and turn it into proper military equipment with official documentation. Thompson didn't care about that. He cared that the engineers wanted credit for the innovation. They were writing official reports, submitting technical patents, claiming the mirror system as an Ordnance Department engineering innovation. Thompson's name appeared nowhere in the official documentation. Neither did Crawford's name. Neither did Hayes's name. The official record would show that Army engineers had identified a problem with Sherman gunner visibility and developed an engineered solution. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams tried to correct this injustice. He wrote letters to multiple headquarters, submitted detailed reports, made absolutely certain Thompson's name was in every document from 4th Armored Division. But those reports got buried in bureaucracy, lost in the massive paper flow of wartime administration. The engineering team's version became the official historical record. Army engineers had identified a tactical problem and developed a technical solution. Thompson learned about this in December. An officer showed him the official documentation, asked if he wanted to file a formal complaint through channels. Thompson said no. He didn't care about credit or recognition. He cared that crews were surviving, that loaders weren't burning alive because their gunners couldn't see flanking threats. If the Army wanted to pretend engineers invented the mirrors, that was acceptable to Thompson, as long as they actually installed them in tanks. By January 1945, the modification was standard across all American armored units in Europe. Over 800 Sherman tanks had mirrors professionally installed. Production lines in the United States started including them in new tanks coming off assembly lines. The system was official, approved, properly documented. No longer a field improvisation by a desperate loader. Thompson continued loading shells for Crawford. They fought through the Battle of the Bulge, the desperate German winter offensive, pushed into Germany itself as the Reich collapsed. survived engagements that would have killed them 6 months earlier. The mirror saved them 4 more times during the advance into Germany. Each time Crawford spotted a German tank trying to flank them. Each time they fired first accurately. Each time Thompson stayed alive instead of burning. Other crews reported similar experiences. Loaders who would have died in December were still alive in January, still alive in February, still fighting in March. The mirrors had become so ubiquitous that new replacement crews didn't even realize they were originally unauthorized modifications. They thought the mirrors were factory equipment, standard Sherman design that had always been there. Only the veteran crews knew the truth, knew that a desperate loader had installed the first mirror in September without authorization, knew that the modification had spread from crew to crew, mechanic to mechanic, battalion to battalion, knew that it had saved hundreds of lives before the Army officially adopted it and took credit. Thompson's innovation had fundamentally changed how American tanks fought, but his name never appeared in any official citation. No commendation, no medal, no recognition whatsoever. The engineering team took all the credit in official reports. The Army accepted their version without question, and Thompson went back to loading shells and keeping Crawford alive. He'd saved Crawford, saved Hayes, saved hundreds of other tank crews whose names he'd never know. That was enough for him. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Thompson's crew was in Czechoslovakia when Germany finally surrendered. They'd fought continuously for 11 brutal months, survived dozens of major engagements. The mirror had saved them 8 separate times during the advance across France and Germany. 8 times Crawford spotted German tanks trying to flank them before those tanks could fire. 8 times they shot first. 8 times Thompson kept loading shells instead of burning alive. Crawford survived the war with an impressive combat record. 63 separate combat engagements. 14 confirmed tank kills against Panthers and other German armor. He returned to Detroit in August 1945 after processing through separation centers. Went back to factory work, got married, had 3 children. He kept a photograph of his Sherman tank crew on his desk for 40 years. Thompson was in that photograph, standing next to the tank, young and thin, covered in grease and dirt. Crawford never forgot what Thompson had done. Every year on September 19th, the anniversary of that first battle where the mirror had saved them, Crawford called Thompson, thanked him for installing the mirror, told him he wouldn't have survived the war without it. Thompson always said the same thing. He was just doing his job, keeping his crew alive. That's what loaders do for their gunners. Thompson stayed in the Army until 1946, then went home to Pennsylvania, small town outside Pittsburgh. He worked in a steel mill for 32 years doing the same kind of work he'd done before the war. Hot metal, heavy machinery, long shifts, dangerous work. He married in 1948, had 2 daughters, lived a quiet, unremarkable civilian life. Thompson never talked about the mirror modification. When people asked about his war service, he said he was a loader on tank crews. That's all. He didn't mention the modification. Didn't mention saving hundreds of lives. Didn't mention that he'd changed how American tanks fought in Europe. It wasn't modesty. He just didn't think it mattered anymore. The war was over. Everyone had come home or hadn't. What happened in France seemed very far away. Hayes also survived the war. The gunner who'd lost his first loader to a flanking Panther. Hayes fought until Germany surrendered. Never lost another crew member after getting the mirror installed. He credited the mirror with saving his crew 3 separate times. After the war, Hayes became a high school history teacher in Ohio. Sometimes he'd tell his students about tank combat, about how small innovations could save lives in warfare. He never mentioned Thompson by name. Didn't know if Thompson wanted the attention or recognition. By the 1960s, the mirror modification had been completely forgotten by military historians. New tanks had vastly improved optics, sophisticated sighting systems, much better visibility than the Sherman. The M4 Sherman was obsolete. Museums displayed them. Veterans looked at them nostalgically. But nobody remembered that hundreds of Shermans in Europe had crude, improvised mirrors mounted inside their turrets. Nobody remembered that a desperate loader had installed the first one in September 1944 to keep his gunner alive. The official Army history of armored vehicle development never mentioned Thompson or his innovation. The engineering reports credited Ordnance Department innovations. The patents belonged to civilian contractors who'd refined the design. Thompson's contribution had been systematically erased from the historical record, not intentionally or maliciously, just through normal bureaucratic processes. Field modifications weren't considered historically significant. Official engineering developments were what got documented and remembered. Thompson retired from the steel mill in 1978, spent his retirement working in his garage, fixing cars, repairing small engines, doing the same kind of practical mechanical work he'd done in the Army. His daughters knew he'd served in the war, knew he'd been a tank crewman, didn't know anything about mirrors or modifications or saving hundreds of lives. In 1992, a military historian researching Sherman tank modifications found references to improvised mirrors in old maintenance logs from 4th Armored Division. The logs mentioned Staff Sergeant Thompson as the mechanic who'd installed them. The historian spent 6 months tracking down veterans from that unit through veteran registries and reunion associations. Found Crawford living in Detroit. Crawford told him the complete story about Martinez dying, about Thompson installing the mirror, about how it spread through the entire division and eventually the entire Army. The historian found Thompson through veteran registries. Thompson was 74 years old, still living in Pennsylvania, still working part-time in his garage on cars. The historian asked if he'd installed the mirrors. Thompson confirmed yes, asked why the historian cared about something that happened almost 50 years ago. The historian explained he'd found maintenance logs from over 40 different battalions. He estimated that somewhere between 600 and 800 Sherman tanks had mirrors installed between September 1944 and May 1945. Based on survival rate improvements in units that used the mirrors versus units that did not, the modification had probably saved between 200 and 300 American tank crew lives, maybe more. Thompson said he'd never tried to count. He just remembered Crawford and Hayes and the others who'd come back alive. That was enough for him. The historian published his findings in 1994. A small academic article in a military history journal described the mirror modification in detail, credited Thompson properly, included extensive interviews with Crawford and Hayes and other survivors. The article reached maybe 2,000 readers total, mostly academics, military historians, veterans, history enthusiasts. Thompson received 3 letters after the article was published. One from a former tank commander who'd used the mirror modification in Germany, said it had saved his crew twice. One from a loader who'd installed mirrors in 6th Armored Division, said he'd learned the installation technique from Thompson's crew chief. One from a military museum curator, asking if Thompson would be willing to donate his tools or any materials from the war. Thompson had nothing to donate. He'd left everything in Europe when he came home. Came back with just his duffel bag and discharge papers. No souvenirs, no memorabilia, just memories of Martinez and Kozlowski and the 11 others who'd died before Thompson figured out how to keep Crawford alive. Crawford visited Thompson in 1996, drove from Detroit to Pennsylvania specifically to see him. They hadn't seen each other in over 40 years. Talked for 6 hours in Thompson's garage about the war, about the mirror, about the crews they'd lost and the crews they'd saved. Crawford said he'd tried for years to get Thompson officially recognized. Written letters to the Army, to veterans organizations, to historical societies. Nobody cared. Too much time had passed. Too many bigger stories from the war that seemed more important. Thompson said he didn't need recognition. He had Crawford sitting in his garage, alive, 60 years after they should have died in France. That's all the recognition Thompson needed. Frank Thompson died on March 14, 2003. He was 84 years old, heart failure. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his service in World War II as a tank crewman with 4th Armored Division. It did not mention the mirror modification. Did not mention that he'd saved hundreds of lives. Did not mention that he'd changed how American armored forces fought in Europe. His funeral was small and quiet. Family members, a few friends from the mill, 3 men Thompson didn't know personally attended. They introduced themselves after the service. Tank veterans. Men whose crews had used the mirror modification during the war. They'd read about Thompson's death in veterans' newsletters. Wanted to pay respects. Wanted his family to know what he'd actually done. Thompson's daughters learned the full story that day for the first time. Learned their father had installed mirrors in tanks without authorization. Learned those mirrors had saved hundreds of lives. Learned he'd done it risking court-martial. Learned he'd never talked about it because he didn't think it was important enough to mention. Today, Thompson's story exists only in fragments, maintenance logs in the National Archives, interview transcripts in military history collections, a paragraph in an obscure book about Sherman tank modifications. Most people who study World War II armor history have never heard of Frank Thompson. The mirror modification is a footnote at best. Curiosity. Not significant enough for mainstream textbooks. But if you visit the Armor Museum at Fort Knox, you can see a Sherman tank from 4th Armored Division. Inside the turret, mounted to the left of the gunner's seat, there's a small rectangular mirror, 3 inches by 4 inches, metal frame, crude bent wire brackets. It's labeled as a typical field modification from late 1944. No name attached to it. That mirror is Thompson's real legacy, not the official recognition he never received. The real legacy. The one that mattered to Crawford and Hayes and the 200 other men who survived because a desperate loader broke regulations to save his crew. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official committees or engineering teams sitting in offices, through soldiers who see problems and fix them immediately, who don't wait for authorization or approval, who risk everything because their friends are dying, and they can't stand watching it anymore. Thompson installed that first mirror to save Crawford. That mirror ended up saving hundreds of American tankers, and almost nobody remembers his name, but you do now. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Every like helps us rescue more forgotten stories from the archives, and share them with people who care about real history. Subscribe to join our community of people who believe these heroes deserve to be remembered. These stories don't preserve themselves. They need people like you who understand that the real heroes weren't always the ones with medals and official recognition. Sometimes they were loaders with mirrors and the courage to break regulations because doing the right thing mattered more than following orders. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in Texas, Germany, a tank museum, the grandchild of a Sherman crew member? Our audience stretches across the entire world. You're not just watching. You're part of keeping these memories alive for future generations. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Frank Thompson's story. And thank you for making sure he doesn't disappear into silence and forgotten history. These men deserve to be remembered. You're helping make that happen.